All right, so for this section, what we're going to talk about is our outflows and how we want to start allocating them and thinking about them. So think about it like this. We have discussed our inflows coming in and how they are coming in, so we know what's coming in. Think about it like water coming in. So you got water coming in and you want this water to accumulate in certain places. So it's like, all right, I got water and I want to channel it because I want it to accumulate over here because whatever reason that you want water over there. But if you just look at it and you're just like, I hope it goes, that's where I want, and you watch the water come in and it just kind of drips and kind of channels over there and a little bit channels over there, and it just some of it might trickle to where you want it to go, but not most of it, right? Because you're just looking at it, you're just kind of hoping that it's going to go where you want it to go, and some of it did, and that's kind of cool, but not very much of what was coming in actually went where you wanted it to go. So what we have to do is we've got to create channels. And we say, okay, this is where I want the money to go, so I'm going to dig out this channel and make sure that it blocks water from going over here. Water's trickling out over here, I don't want it to, so I'm going to put a guide, and we're going to channel this, and now I have this basin that's accumulating water by default because we created it to accumulate there. So now, it's not that I have more water than the next guy. We had the same amount of water coming in, I just channeled it to go where it is that I want it to go. Finances and money are that same way. If you just sit back and hope that your money comes in and goes where you want it to go, here's my money. Wasn't able to put much money in savings this month, wasn't able to invest, wasn't able to pay my bills, but that's just how it goes. If that's how you live your life, that's what it's going to be. But remember what we talked about at the very beginning, growth is a matter of course. It will happen if you are willing to take a look and say, money, becoming financially well off is not, it's not for the chosen few, it's for me. But for it to happen for me, I have to enact these principles. One of these principles being structure. I have to have the right structure in place. So if my money is coming in and I'm just hoping it lands to where I want it to go, I can't be surprised when the money doesn't go where I want it to go. Man, I just keep hoping every month I can put some money away, but every month comes and goes and I can't do it. It's because we're not making it to happen. So just in the same way that the water comes in, I gotta dig a channel. I gotta find out where the water is leaking out. I gotta dig channels, and then as I dig those channels, the water accumulates where I want it to accumulate as a matter of course, okay? Literally as a matter of course. So we have to create that same course for your money so that it accumulates where you want it to accumulate. This is that principle of structure. We have to have the structures in place. Yes, it's effort. Yes, it takes time to dig some of those things out. Yes, it is counter to what you want to do sometimes. Sometimes you want to go spend money over here, but you can't. You've got to create some structures and some boundaries in place to prevent your money from going just wherever it will. All right, so I used to work at a place that we had, I used to work at a car dealership, and I was a finance director, and I had finance managers, and when they would sell a warranty, we had a book. Okay, so if somebody came in, they had a car and they wanted to buy a warranty for their car. Excuse me. They wanted to buy a warranty for their car. There was a cost book. Okay, so the finance manager would go up, they would look and say, okay, you want to buy a 7-year warranty for 100,000 miles, and there was just a little grid, and they would go in. Well, the book showed the cost to the dealership. And then there was another cost that they had to mentally add, and then they had to add the profit on top of that to get to the selling price. Well, what I kept finding over and over was that every time I turned around, they would A, look in the wrong grid, okay, so they would sell a warranty for the wrong cost, B, they would forget to add profit onto it, or C, it would just be some other mistake, okay? I don't know what C is supposed to be. But there was so many mistakes made with it. So every time I turned around and I was expecting a certain income to be there from the sale of one of these warranties, I was proven mistaken because they would just forget to add the costs, or they would add the wrong costs, or they would just look at the wrong grid. Okay? So what I did to solve that was not say, hey, look at this better. I took time and I reevaluated the process, and I created a new book that was just a price book. And I already had the markups and everything in there. Now, did that take away from them looking in the wrong grid? Nope. Sometimes they would still, trace their finger and look at the wrong place. But because the book already had the markup in it and it had the price, we never lost money when they did that. We just didn't make maybe as much as I was expecting. Before, I was losing money, but now I was just not making quite as much. Okay? So what I'm saying here is it takes time to create right structures, but as you create those structures, okay, you're still going to have some money leak here, there, and everywhere. It's just the way money goes. It's not always going to be perfect. But when you take that time and you implement those structures, what happens is eventually money will start channeling and accumulating to where you want it to go. Okay? But it takes time, it takes some intentionality, and it takes some ability to be proactive and look at the future and to look at the current and see what's going on and make the right decisions. So what we're going to talk about today is we're going to look at the money came in, and now the money is going out. These are my outflows, and I want to look and say, where does the money need allocated? Remember, financial planning is the allocation of financial resources. So if that money is coming in and I have it, now how do I allocate it so that it goes to where I want it to go? We do that by creating the right structures. So as far as definitions go in this portion, we have expenses and we have outflows. Okay? Outflows are just everywhere the money goes. It's our outflow, the flow out. Our expenses, by definition, is the money that is used for our upkeep in our living. So, for instance, a rent payment, food, groceries, gas, things like that are required for us to be able to live. Those are our expenses, but not all expenses, not all outflows are expenses. For instance, putting money in savings would be an outflow, but it's not an expense. Excuse me. So as far as definitions go, expenses are things that are required for our upkeep. Outflows are just wherever the money goes out to. So what we are trying to do in this lecture is understand where does it need to go to? How do I need to allocate it? So we want to allocate it in a way that we're creating the right structures so that money goes where we want it to go. Now, in that, so now that we know a little bit of the difference between an outflow and an expense, most people live their lives that their income and their expenses, not just their outflows, but their expenses are equal, okay? And what happens when your income and your expenses are equal, this is where you get people living paycheck to paycheck. And this is why money didn't end up where I wanted it, the water didn't go where I wanted it. It didn't go because we have a situation where our expenses are equal to our income. So what we need to do is we need to minimize the relationship between our income and our expenses so that if our expenses vary a little bit, they're okay. If your expenses are, if your income is here and your expenses are here, and your expenses vary, what happens? Well, if they go up here, you're in debt. If they go down here, you might have a little bit, but probably not. It doesn't happen very often that your expenses go down. Typically, your expenses just tend to go up. So if your expenses are here and they vary, it's just going to cause problems. If your expenses are down here, your income is here, and there's variation, you're okay. In the same way that in that cost book, I changed it to be a price book, if they made a mistake, I was still okay. I was still making money because They just made a mistake. I just didn't make quite as much, but I was still making money. That's what we have to do with your understanding of where your money needs allocated. We have to get your income and your expenses to be in line with where they need to be. And you can't do that unless you understand where your outflows need to be, all of your outflows, and what your outflows actually are. So we have a few outflows that I want to address before we get to discussing your expenses. So those outflows that we want to discuss are these. We have savings, we have giving, and then we have what I like to call regular irregularities. So I'll get to those. Savings, giving, and then regular irregularities. Okay, so let's talk about the first one, which is savings. When money comes in, remember, financial planning is how do we allocate that money? So when money comes in, the first place that we need to allocate it is towards savings. 10% right off the top should be our first target to put into savings. So if $1,000 comes in, 10% or $100, we allocate towards savings. Why do we do that first? Okay, there's a few reasons, which I'll get to in a moment. But you think about the money, or the flow of water coming in, and if we're just sitting back hoping that the water goes to where we want it to go, how much of it is actually going to get to where we want it to go? That's where I wanted it. Water, why aren't you going where I wanted it to go? That's not fair, right? If that's how we treat our money, we can't be surprised that when we get to the end of the month, there's no money in savings, because we're just hoping that the money is going to go like, oh, I just hoped that it was going to land in my savings account, and son of a gun, it didn't, okay? We have to be intentional about creating a structure so that we can put 10% of our money into savings. So when you are looking at your budget, when you're making your budget, when you maybe get your first job, or maybe right now if you have an income, we have to start looking, how do we get our expenses in line with our income? Well, we got to understand what is going to force our expenses down. And that first one is savings. So we take our 10%, we take our income, we take 10% and we put it right off the top, we begin to put it into savings. If you save first, you will have the money to do it. Pay it just like it's a bill. So there's the story of two people. They're both making $3,000 a month. They both have the exact same expenses. And the first guy says, I'm going to save 10% at the beginning of the month right off the top. The other guy says, I'm going to save everything that's left. And I've got more money than 10% that's left. You get to the end of the month, who saved the most amount of money? The person that put 10% in first. Because at the end of the month, behaviorally, well, this came up and that came up and I forgot about this expense, so there wasn't anything left to put in savings. So pay yourself first. 10%, put it into savings. All right, so that's the first structure, 10% into savings. The second place is giving, that we take 10% and we just give it away. That could be giving it to a charity, giving it to a religious organization, could be giving it to just somebody that you know that is in need, but get in the habit of just giving 10% of your income away. Now, is that just a moral thing or an ethical thing? Well, I do think that there's ethics associated with it, for sure. But from a financial planning standpoint, that is a very practical decision as well. Let me explain to you why. Because what we're trying to do is create structures for our money. And if our income is here and our expenses are here, whenever there's that variation, it causes problems. So we have to figure out structures to drive our expense ratios lower, okay? And we have to force ourselves to have lower expense ratios because it doesn't happen automatically. Oh, I need the new AirPod Pros, or whatever they're called. I need those, so I gotta go buy those. If we don't have some kind of structure to force our expense ratio to be lower, then money is just going to go just like water does. It just goes path of least resistance. So practically speaking, giving that 10% forces our expense ratio to be lower. So think about this. If you got $3,000 a month coming in, and so 10% of that is $300, so if you're saving $300 and you're giving $300, Now you've got $600 right off the top. So you can't live off of $3,000, now you gotta be living off of $2,400. So it forced your expense ratio to have to be lower. So that's one of the practical considerations of why giving is a good thing. However, there's another one. Giving is very good for your long-term planning because what it does is money is one of those things that it's very easy to become possessive with money. This is my money, I don't want anything to happen to it because it's my money, I've only got a certain amount. Remember we just talked a little bit about the scarcity of resources. We've got to get out of that mindset that money is scarce, that there's not enough. And giving money away, forcing yourself, creating a structure to give others 10% of your income, what that does is it helps to orient yourself correctly towards the right mentality that money is not scarce, there is enough. So when you do that, when you give that money away, it helps get rid of some of that possessiveness, that I have to have this. And one of the places where that becomes very important is when you start investing. See, what happens with a lot of people when they start giving their money for the first time, and not giving to like a charity, but they're giving their money towards an investment. They carry that same possessiveness towards an investment. Well, you can't do that with an investment and expect that investment to work out. If you have that same possessiveness that, hey, I gave this money to this investment and I want that investment to work, you can't be possessive over that, or you're going to get emotional and you're going to make the wrong decisions regarding that investment. So if the investment goes down, you're going to get like frustrated, like, oh, it's not supposed to do that. I need to do this. I need to, and you'll start making emotional decisions rather than just being like, this is just how it happens. And if I lose all the money, who cares? It's okay, we can always make more. So it begins with taking away some of that possessive attitude towards money so that you can make better, so you can disassociate yourself with it. And when you can disassociate yourself from your money, you are more apt to be able to make wiser, logical decisions with what you should do with your money instead of making emotional decisions. So giving, okay, I recommend giving money because it is highly practical towards the long-term success of your overall financial situation. It seems very counterintuitive that, oh, if I give money, I have less. But if you give money, you are actually orienting yourself to be able to have more. It's just going to take time for that to happen. So the first structure that we're doing is 10% into savings. The second structure is 10% into giving. Oh, and I did forget to mention too. So we talked about there's practical standpoints or practical reasons for giving, but there's also ethical and moral ones too. Okay, when we give money to other causes or to other people or to those in need, we start to realize that when we're working, we're not just working for ourselves anymore. When we can take that money and we can see that, hey, we helped this family that maybe didn't have very much. We were able to give them some money, or we were able to give it to this cause or to whatever. You can start to see how your money can benefit others, okay? It gives you a greater sense of purpose, it gives you a greater sense of community, and it gives you a greater sense of feeling that you're a part of something that's bigger than just yourself, okay? Which also orients you towards making better decisions over the long term. So there are practical reasons, but there's also ethical reasons to become a giver in your life, okay? So first structure, savings. Second structure is giving. And then the third structure is regular irregularities. Now, what are regular irregularities? Okay, there are irregular events, expenses that occur in our lives, but they happen regularly. So but there are several of them. So let me give you an example. My son plays this game on the computer, and where he hatches pets. Okay, so like you can hatch a dog, you can hatch a dragon, you can hatch a cat, you know, whatever. You can hatch all these things, and there's ones that are a lot more rare than other ones. So some of them you might hatch, and he will tell me, I've got like this 0.1% chance of hatching this legendary flying dragon, and that's what I hatched today. Cool. And then the next day, I had this 0.0004% chance of hatching this other thing, and then like, how do you get a 0.00 chance to hatch these things, but you're hatching them every day? Unless there's so many of them that statistically you're going to hatch something that is a little more rare. Let me put this in a little different terms. Let's say I have a drawing, okay? I'm going to draw something, like a raffle. And let's say I have a 1 in 100 chance of winning this pen. And I have a 1 in 100 chance of winning this notepad. Because let's say I've got 100 items in this drawing. And there's, I could win this candle, I could win this coffee cup, or I could win 96 other things. So the probability of winning this candle is 1%, because there's 100 items in this drawing. There's a 1% chance of winning this coffee cup, because there's 100 items in this, and this coffee cup's only one of them, and so on down the line. So if I go in, I reach into the hat, I draw, and it says, ha, you won a notebook. Wow, I won a notebook. There was a 1% chance of winning this notebook. Well, that's true, but there was a 100% chance of winning something, okay? Because if I reached into it and I drew a coffee cup, wow, there was still a 1% chance of winning that coffee cup. So they're irregular. It's a small percentage, but there was enough of them that no matter what I picked, I was going to win something that had a small percentage. All right, so what does that translate to? There are irregular expenses that happen in our lives. I had a client one time that had, we had her budget. She had an $800 vet bill. Oh, Joe, I had an $800 vet bill, had to take the dog to the vet. That doesn't happen all the time. No, of course not. You don't spend that much at the vet. It's fine, I understand. The next month there was like a $1,000 car repair that needed done. Oh, it doesn't happen all the time. The next month there might have been something else, or there might not have been, I don't remember. But at any rate, there's enough of these irregular expenses that you are going to have them regularly, whether it's this expense, or whether it's that one, or whether it's another one. There are enough of them that even though, yes, they are irregular, there are enough of them that happen regularly that we have to start planning for them and accounting for them and anticipating them. Some of the common ones might be, maybe home repairs or car repairs, holiday spending, okay, school spending. There's things like that that are regular, or they're irregular in when they occur. For instance, Christmas spending might only happen once a year, okay? So even though it is irregular, it still happens regularly enough. So there's enough of these things, these irregular events, that they're still regular, and we've got to account for them and plan for them. So if we take into consideration, if we look at our income and say, how are we going to allocate this? And we think about three initial places that we want to start having in our budget, is savings, giving, and then these irregular regularities, or these regular irregularities, right? What that is going to force us to do when we are budgeting, and we're going to take a look at this in a budget here in a bit. What that is going to force us to do is we can't look at our income here and our expenses can be right here. It will force our expense ratio down a lot more than what it needs to be, or what we think that it needs to be, okay? It will force that expense ratio down. And that's what we are looking for. We need a reasonable expense ratio, not an unreasonable expense ratio. The more that we can drive that expense ratio down, the better that we're going to be, right? A lot of times within personal finance, or even within business, it's pretty common to think that the right answer is to reduce expenses or gain revenue. And there's truth to that. If we can increase our income or if we can reduce our expenses, that's fine. But really what we need to be looking at is our expense ratio as it pertains to our income. And that's what we're looking at here, is if we can drive that down, then when there are variations within our expenses or our income, we are going to be okay. All right, so I think that's where we are with this section. We're going to go over in a little bit, we're going to go over this looking at it in a budget. But before we do that, for the next section, I want to go into some of these vignettes of things that are kind of just important to keep in mind as we're looking at our expenses, because the next section, what we're looking at is managing these expenses. All right, so if before what we were looking at was these structures that will drive our expense ratio down, now we need to look at how do we start managing these expenses, okay? Because now we have money that we need to figure out, where do I start managing my living expenses? How do I do this? So let's take a look at just a few things that are important to keep in mind. So one of these goes back to this idea that growth is a matter of course. Growth happens no matter what. And we have to start learning how to work with growth rather than work against it. Let me give you an example. When we are younger, for instance, there's a lot of things that we don't care necessarily about. When I was in college, I had a cable spool, okay? If you know what a cable spool is, if not, look it up. But I had a cable spool as my coffee table. I didn't care. I was in college. It wasn't a big deal. I'd come home, get on my couch, watch TV, put my pizza on the cable spool. Who cares? It doesn't matter. I had this hideous, nasty couch, okay, in this place that I lived in that was a hole in the wall. All right, so, which, and looking back, I'm very thankful for those things that I had. I'm not trying to denigrate where I was, but I was just meaning, like, it didn't matter, right? It was like, so what? I'm young, I don't care. It's not a big deal. As you get older, growth is a matter of course, there comes a time when you don't want to eat pizza every single day of your life, or you don't want to just throw your clothes in the dryer to iron them. You want things to be a little bit nicer. You don't want to have filthy furniture. You want to have something nicer because you're getting a little bit older and you have people come over, you want to entertain, and you want things not to be pretentious. You want it to be nice to be pretentious, but you want it to be nice because you want it to be a nice place for guests to come. You want to have it to be a nice place to entertain. So as you grow, because growth is a matter of course, your tastes will change and they will evolve and they will increase just as a matter of course. It's because you're growing, and so things will change. So when those things do begin to change, you want to be able to have the money to invest into those things, whether it's nicer furniture or a nicer home or a nicer car or whatever it is. Again, not to be pretentious. It's not because you're trying to be a pretentious person. Going back to the beginning, you have to have the right character that we build upon. So I want to have the right character. So you don't want to have nicer things to be pretentious, but you want to have the nicer things because you want your life to be nicer, and you want to be able to have other people come into your life and it to be comfortable and nice and peaceful. So I know a lot of students that are spending a pretty good amount of money on, say, a housing expense or a car allowance. And there's nothing wrong with spending money. I don't want to ever get you to think that there's something wrong with spending money. But what I want you to think about is reduce, when we come in and let's say we're in college and we go to have one of these really nice places because we're funding it on student loan money, or maybe mom and dad are paying for it or whatever, and it's nice to have or maybe you're paying for it, maybe you've got a good job and you've got a good income. And it's nice to have some of the amenities, like, hey, I'm staying in these places and I've got a pool and I got a movie theater and I've got, a gym and I've got all of these things. Yes, those are niceties, but when you are younger and it doesn't really matter as much, take the time to live a little more cheaply and save some of that money. Set it aside and start saving it. Because as you grow, your tastes will change anyway, and you will want some of those nicer things. But if you spent all of your money at a time when it really didn't matter, it was just kind of nice, then when you get to that place that you grow and you really kind of need a little bit more out of your life, you're not going to have the money because you spent the money on this side rather than when you needed it on this side, okay? So I'm not telling you where to live or not to live. But what I want to encourage you is that in a time when it does not matter as much, think very carefully about where you're spending your money. Is it really wise to be spending extra money on a place that has a pool? It's maybe not the best place for you. Is it wise to spend your money on a nicer car right now when you can live a little bit more cheaply on a lesser vehicle? Because again, there will come a time when you don't want a cheap vehicle, you want something a little bit nicer. But is now that time to invest? So what I want to encourage you with is we start looking at managing your expenses. Got to think about what is a responsible use of my money, and yes, if I lower my lifestyle expenses, yes, I'm not going to have as nice a house. I'm not going to have as nice a car. But right now, when I'm younger, does it really matter that much? And the answer is probably not. It will matter when you're older. So you want to save that money for the future when it does matter, instead of spending it now when it doesn't matter quite as much. Okay, so when you are looking at spending your money and allocating your money appropriately, we've allocated it towards the right things, saving, giving, irregularities, and now we just have less money in our budget, so now we have to look at lesser things, and that's okay. Okay, so that's the first part of this, is let's minimize those expenses and have something a little bit less so that later we can begin to have something more. The next little vignette on managing our expenses, and that's this: pennies and nickels matter. So just like what we said at the beginning, is that sometimes we think that money is had in the big things. Like if I can save 10%, okay, then I can do this. But I'll be good if I can save that. But that happens by making sure that you are being responsible with the pennies and the nickels. Okay? A lot of times we think, well, that $2 coffee doesn't matter, or that $2 cookie, extra $2 cookie at Subway, it doesn't really matter. It's not a big deal. My bill was 10 and now it's 12. Not a big deal. Okay? Those little expenses add up over time. Okay? There's a saying that it's the little foxes that'll spoil the vine. And it's those little things that will add up to become big things. Because, an extra $50 here, or $10 there, or $5 there, whatever, all of those things will add up to be the amount of money that maybe you wanted to put in savings. So I want to encourage you that these pennies and the nickels, these little small expenses, they matter, and don't think that they don't matter. Don't think that they're not going to affect you in the long run. Remember, people stumble over these small things looking for the big things. We want to be able to have this good investment, but I'm not willing to forego the premium coffee as opposed to just having a regular coffee. Okay? I'm not willing to have $100 less on a car payment, but or I'm not willing to put $100 in savings, but I'll put $100 more on my car payment, or whatever, okay? If we can't take care of those small things, then we're never going to be able to get to a place to where we can have bigger things, or to where we can generate wealth with our bigger things. Okay, so it's like, if you can't take care of what you have responsibly, you're not going to be able to take care of what you want to have. All right, so if you can't take care of what you have, you're not going to be able to take care of what you want to have. And incidentally, this is one of the reasons that people want to be rich, and they seek to be rich rather than seek to be responsible, because they want to be able to live their life with some irresponsibility, okay, with a level of irresponsibility, that their burn rate, okay, the burn rate of their expenses can exceed their wealth creation rate. Well, if you are rich, okay, or let's say very, very wealthy, you can have a very, very high burn rate of your money, but you're not actually making any money. You're not creating any long-term wealth. You're just burning it. You're just spending it down. If you can understand how to create wealth, then it doesn't matter whether you start with a lot or start with a little. If you can learn how to create wealth, then as long as you can keep your burn rate below it, then you can begin creating and can become bigger and bigger and bigger. And so you don't need to have you don't have that mental need to be rich, because you can create your own riches rather than have to rely on rich or a lottery ticket so that you can live the life that you want to live. Create it by growing it. And it starts by managing those little things. Those little things become those bigger things. So the pennies and the nickels in your budget, they do add up. And if you can save $10 here, or $5 there, or $7 over here, save it, because it matters and it will add up to you over time. All right, third little vignette is bank balance accounting. And this is how most people look at their expenses. I know we've discussed this a little bit, but we discussed it. Most people look and say, well, I have this much money in my account, therefore I can spend this much money. That's called bank balance accounting. Here, what's my bank balance? Here's what I have. Here's what I can spend. And there's a few reasons that that's bad. One is because it does not take into account any of those irregularities that occur. It doesn't take into account that any long-term planning, long-term savings, giving. It doesn't take any of those things into account. It just looks and says, I'm living very much for the day. I have $3 in my account. I want a $3 coffee from Starbucks. Away we go. Doesn't matter because I don't have any money anyway. What's $3 going to matter? Remember the last vignette. It does matter. So when we live our lives like that, what it does is it orients us, okay, there's that word orienting again, that orients us towards living off of the zero. It's what we call, in my business, we call living off of the zero. We become so accustomed to having $0 in our account or living paycheck to paycheck that inadvertently we steer our lives to thinking that that's acceptable to live off of that. And what I want to teach you all to do is that is not acceptable. That's not acceptable for who you are as a person, to perpetually live your life on a zero. You should be focusing and orienting yourself not towards the scarcity of resources, but towards an infinite supply of resources. Okay? So instead of living and saying, I got $3, it doesn't matter anyway, I'm just going to spend it. No, it does matter. Set that $3 aside and keep that $3. And don't live off of that. Live off of your budget. Make educated, proactive decisions on how much money you're going to allow yourself to spend. Remember, you are the master of your money. Your money is not the master of you. So you have to take authority over that and gain control over your money. Remember, your life doesn't happen in the future, it happens now, and you have to take control over that. So this idea of bank balance accounting, it's just orienting yourself to the wrong direction. So for instance, if you are walking towards a ditch, or let's say you're walking towards a cliff, and you're just walking towards it, is it any surprise that you're going to fall off the cliff if you just keep walking? Of course it's no surprise. That's where you are oriented. So on the flip side, if you are walking towards somewhere you want to go, is it any surprise, if that's the direction that you're oriented, that that's where you end up? No. And so it's the same way with our money, is we have to orient our mindset towards money towards the right place. And we don't want to orient it towards the zero or having $0 in our account. We want to orient it towards having more money in our account and an infinite supply of money, and learning to be able to create money so that we can continually grow, to grow and have money to help push us forward in life. Okay? So I heard one time that when you are learning like defensive driving or race car drivers or whatever, they said, isn't it amusing that, you hear all these stories of people where, they slammed on the brakes and there was nothing for 4 miles but this one telephone pole. And of course, in the accident, when they slammed on the brakes, that's the thing they hit, is that one telephone pole. They said, why does that happen? Well, the reason it happens is because we become so focused on not hitting, so we're like driving, we become so focused on, I don't want to hit that telephone pole right there, that inadvertently we actually steer towards it. Because we're so focused on that not happening, but we actually steer ourselves towards it. So it says the right thing is not to focus on where you don't want to go, but to focus on where you want to go. You don't want to live on the zero. So don't focus on the zero. Don't focus on bank balance accounting. I've got this much money in my account, so I can go spend that much money. No, don't focus yourself on that. That's not appropriate. Orient yourself to where you want to go, which is to create wealth so that you have long-term riches and long-term wealth. Okay? So don't do this bank balance accounting. Focus on an infinite supply of money that can be created and grown. It just takes time, and it takes planning. It takes good decision making. All right, so a couple of other things here. Don't live off of credit if you can help it, certainly. I know some of you have student loans. Some of you have a lot of student loans. As much as possible, don't live off of credit. If you are living off of credit, do everything in your power right now to begin mitigating that, especially if you have very large student loan balances. And I know I've talked to some students that have very hefty student loans. And we are going to talk about that. And if that's something that's bothering you, don't hesitate to reach out, because I know that this is the student loan issue is a big issue. Anyway, so I know it's a cause for concern. If you are in that situation, don't wait till tomorrow. Don't wait till the next day. Don't wait till you graduate. Start mitigating that situation immediately. Start going and don't live off of any more credit as much as you can help. Try to live on the cheap as much as possible, and start building some money to be able to save towards paying off your student loans, because the piper does need paid, always. And I don't like a lot of the situation with student loans. I don't like how they work and how they just give basically indiscriminately. But at any rate, if you are there, try to get off of that as quickly as possible. Same thing with credit cards. Don't live off of credit cards. As long as you have, if your living expenses are taken care of, or if your living expenses, if you do need credit for living expenses, try to figure out a way to not, as in get a job somewhere, try to make some money somewhere, any way that you can to try to bring in some extra money so that you're not living off of credit. If you're there, I'm not here to judge you by any means. I'm just here to recommend as quickly as possible, stop living off of credit. Okay, don't count on it. And I know some of you, if you do use credit cards, which we'll discuss when we get to the liabilities section, but I know sometimes companies will entice you very much with attractive intro APRs like 0%, or you get points for doing certain things. There's a lot of money that people spend in interest because they were trying to get points for something. So develop good habits and don't live off of credit.